Welcome to another incredible session. We have a great guest today. Her name is Karen Books. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Karen is a nationally certified and state licensed speech language pathologist and owner of Book Speech Therapy Services. She received her academic training from Westchester University and Nova Southeastern University. She holds a BA master's degree in speech language pathology with a minor in psychology. She's also a member of the American Speech Hearing Association, that's ASHA. Karen also holds her Certificate of Clinical Competence from ASHA, as well as a Pennsylvania teaching certification. Karen has been a guest keynote speaker at Penn State University and is an adjunct professor in her field. Karen's also authored and published a book specific for children who are nonverbal. Hey, Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Hi, good morning.
So there are a lot of things that I want to talk with you about today, and it's really interesting because a lot of times actors, we spend so much time with our craft, learning acting skills, but we don't really think very much about probably the most important aspect of the industry, and that's our voice. So one of the things I just wanted to start off with, and it's more of a clarification because I've heard these terms used interchangeably, and I'm not sure exactly what the differences are. So I was hoping that maybe you could tell us what exactly is the difference between dialect and an accent.
Okay, sure. That's actually a common question. So the difference is with accent, it's more of a regional situation, like a different country. You'll hear an Australian accent or something like that, and a dialect is more of everybody speaking English, and you have very specific things that you can pick up. In other words, if you hear somebody dropping an R, generally they're from Boston or New York, and you can pick that dialect up right away. But in addition to that, dialect has to do with the grammar piece as well. For example, people in Canada tend to put the at the end of their sentences. So when you combine those two, that becomes a dialect.
Got it. Okay, so like for instance, even in, let's just say in the UK, certainly people talk very differently if they're from London as opposed to some other parts like Liverpool. Those would be considered different dialects, correct?
Well, they have a different dialect, and then there would be accents within their dialects even. It's a little confusing.
No, but I get it, because in the UK itself, there are certain accents, but the dialects would be different from Liverpool and London, or just the same thing would hold true if you are, living in Center City in Philadelphia as opposed to, being in Manhattan. You would have a different kind of dialect.
Correct. Yes.
Got it. Okay. Yep. So let's take this to the viewpoint of an actor, somebody who, I don't know, let's say came to the States from South America, and so they have a pretty heavy accent at that point, and they are going to be auditioning for a role, and the person has to have a New York type of dialect. So how would you go about working with somebody to try to help them make that transition?
Well, you said South America?
Let's say Mexico.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
From Mexico.
It's actually a more complicated process than just as it would appear, because the two places that you explained both have very strong dialects. So it would be very much determined by the motivation of the actor, because 50% of it would be what I would help them to change, and 50% would be their practice. So in order to do that, first you'd have to lose it's called accent reduction. So they would have to lose their general or original accent, and then in addition to that, add and learn the new accent, which in New York is not an easy one to learn. So combining those two would be It'll be a little bit of a long process unless somebody is very good. You know, there are some people who are very good at picking up accents and changing it, but it's not common.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, that's not a strong point. Now,
Mhm.
honestly, I also have never really worked on it, so maybe I'm not giving myself enough credit. But I mean, I know people who just can listen to somebody else talk who has a different type of accent or dialect, and they just seem to, it just seems to click with them. They can imitate. And that's not something that I find myself doing. And just on a little bit of a side note, and I know I'm wandering a little bit, but I think it's an important point. If you are ever planning to submit yourself for a project and you are told, you have to have a London, well, I'll just say, a London dialect or a Liverpool dialect, and you're thinking, yeah, I could probably pull that off. Don't do that
No.
unless you are really good. And I've turned down a couple of things because I know that I would not, at least as of today, I would not sound like I am a local. And honestly, I didn't want to embarrass myself going to an audition and not really sounding correct. And I also didn't want to embarrass my agent. So I thanked them very much and I declined. So I just wanted to throw out there, it's just really important because a lot of times I've looked at actors' resumes and, it's funny for me when I see somebody will have, Southern accent,
Hmm.
and it's like, it's telling me that you really don't know what you're talking about because I don't even know what a Southern accent means. I mean, do you sound like you're from Mississippi? Do you sound like you're from Texas? Do you sound like you're from,
Right.
parts of, northern Florida? Everybody, those are all very different. Just like when somebody puts down, British accent on their resume.
Right.
Well, that doesn't mean anything. And that actually,
Exactly.
what it does mean is about.
Hmm.
So, so basically, so you're saying that those things can be done, but that's interesting that you're saying that the person has to first learn how to get rid of their accent first. Now, is that some kind of permanent change, or is that something that they would
Yes.
be able to go? It is a permanent change.
It should be. I mean, there are things where you can do accent reduction. If somebody moves to the States, for example, and there is a generalized American um, way to speak, let's say. For example, my personal background, I was born and raised in a part of Philadelphia. It's called South Philadelphia, and it's a very interesting way people talk, and I've had to train myself over the years to lose that. And so a lot of people in my family, for example, would say, "Can I have some water?" And for a long time, I had to train myself to say water because that is how it should be said. So when you're an actor, you need to understand the generalized American way to say things, for example. So if somebody from that part of Philadelphia went to audition for a commercial and said, "Okay, I'd like water," I don't think they would get the part. So it is, you need to do accent reduction if you have any type of um, nuance to your speech.
Yeah, and and that's a really interesting point because especially if you are auditioning for a national television commercial,
Exactly.
I mean, there are times where, yes, they do want it regionalized, where you do have a certain kind of dialect. But most of the time, what they say is they want you to sound like you are from nowhere,
That's
where they
exactly what I'm talking about. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, where you're not, they will not be able to pick up exactly where you are from because they're trying to reach everybody across America. And so now for those, and like I'm not going to do a session here, but I'm just trying to get like a general idea. For that kind of work, is it more of like physical exercises that people do with the way that their mouth moves when they say words, or what is that process like?
Um, I wouldn't say it's more physical. So it's a lot of listening first. So I don't actually specialize in this. I have familiarity with it, but there are people who just do accent reduction. And what you want to do is I would record the person, video record them so they can watch, have them speak, and then we'd watch it back. And so we'd pick out a few words, and then we'd say, okay, so let's say you have somebody from the South and you want them to have that generalized American accent. People from the South tend to talk slower. We call this prosody, and it's the timing. So their rate of speech is longer and drawn out. Hi, y'all. How you do? So that you would have to take a look at the prosody, the intonation of their voice, where they place stress on syllables, the rate of which they talk, which is obviously very different than the rate of somebody from New York. They talk very quickly. So it really would depend on what their accent is coming in, and then you work on showing them, okay, some people you would work on, if they have a New York accent, it would be slowing their rate of speech and fixing the R. If you haven't said R your entire life, it's a little bit tricky to fix. R is a very complicated consonant. It has 31 variations. And
It's
yes, you have
31
31 variations, and you have to fix all of them.
Like I'm curious, because I've never even thought of it in that way. So, like, can you give us an example of just a couple of them?
Well, so for example, if I'm working with school-age children, a lot of the little kids, you don't need to have, so there's actually, let me back up, there's actually a timeline for when children need to develop sounds. R is the last sound they need to develop, and they don't need to develop it until 8 years old. So in other words, insurance wouldn't cover me helping a child with their R sound until they reach the age of 8 because it's such a complicated sound. So a lot of times you'll hear kids say things like, I really want to go, like that's how they talk. And a lot of parents will ask me if they're 3 or 4 years old, oh, can you fix that? And I'm like, well, not yet. But it's normal. And
Uh-huh.
it's just a difficult sound to teach. So for example, there's the prevocalic R, there's R blend. So when you have a word like world, that's actually a very difficult word for a lot of people with the R sound to say because you're combining the R and the L together, and
Hmm.
your tongue has to move back and forth in your mouth so rapidly, which is very different than saying R at the beginning of the word like red. And that's also very different from saying R at the end of the word, like, say, door. So when you say door, you're combining the R with the or sound, and you can see my lips shaped differently than when I say world. It's just, there's, when you combine it with different consonants and different vowels, it takes different shapes. So you have to move places, and it's very complicated to teach.
Yeah, it's so funny. As you're talking, it allows me to appreciate how I am able to speak without having to think, of where I need to place my mouth, or I mean, place my tongue, or my lips and stuff. That's really that's amazing. Now, I was just thinking, 'cause as you were talking, it made me think if someone came to you, or somebody who specializes in this, and said, "Look, I don't want to do this in a general way. Here are my lines. This is here are the scenes that I'm going to have. Can we just work on my lines to get for me to sound like I'm from New York?" And I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
It doesn't make any difference where. Is it possible for someone to maybe speed up the process and not do that complete reduction, but just specifically hit on certain paragraphs in order to get through the project?
Okay, that would depend on a few things. My first question to them would be, how much time do we have? How willing are you to practice? And how many lines do you have? So yes, the answer is yes. If they only have a short scene or a commercial, absolutely. If it's a whole entire play, then obviously that would take a longer time.
In that case, then it would probably make more sense to go through the whole reduction part and just have the person kind of start fresh instead of trying to do that. Just and look, I know this is an impossible question to really answer specifically, but I'm just trying to get some kind of idea. if someone came to you, like what kind of, if somebody is committed, and they're willing to, to work really hard, I mean, are we talking about months? Are we talking about a year to be able to get the reduction? And
Um, No, I wouldn't say it's a year. I mean, let's say you say somebody is coming very motivated. It would depend on how many sessions they would come to. Is it once a week? Is it 2 or 3 times a week? Is it a half an hour session, an hour session? But I would say depending on what your goal at the end is, it would be maybe a few weeks to prep for something like that. Um, it depends on a lot of variables, unfortunately, and to be able to give you an answer, I would have to know. Speech is just one of those things that, like you said, people take for granted and don't realize the things that go into it. But I think that um, the there are people who pick it up. It really depends on the person. I mean, there are people that, like, I don't know if it's Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel, and he can imitate presidents and those comedians that can do it. So there are people that have a knack for it, but I've noticed that those people have a musical inclination. So when you're musically inclined, you actually have an easier time with changing your voice and your accent.
really, what do you
Yes.
have any idea what that connection is?
Absolutely. So there are two different sections, let's call them, in your brain. Speech is in one section, and music and song is in a different section. So, for example, a lot of times people who stutter will teach them how to remediate that through song and poems because it's changes where the brain activates.
What's so funny? There was oh, and I hope I'm not getting the wrong name here. I'm going to say it anyway. For some reason I'm thinking there was a famous country singer, Mel Tillis, and for some reason that just pops up in my head. I could be completely wrong about this, but when he was interviewed, he was a stutterer, and when he would sing, everything was very
Absolutely.
fluid. So, but I never really understood what that was all about. Why someone would be able to sing, without any of the hesitation.
Oh, it's just due to the different areas of the brain. I mean, the brain's a very complex system to understand and just fascinating. But when you do understand the different areas, then you are able to help people a little bit better. So a lot of my job is studying brain function. Um, but in terms of acting, James Earl Jones, for example, is a well-known actor who used to stutter profoundly.
Hmm.
And when you hear him speak, you can hear that he has a prosody to his voice, and it's a little bit sing-song. And he had to change the tone, drop down to a lower octave, so that changed how he controlled his voice.
What does a prosody mean?
So prosody like the up and down sing-song. Um, it sounds more like a poem. So it's the not really the timing, but where you place the stress.
And so by playing around with that, that can help people who are stuttering.
Mm, a little bit. It's kind of a long process. Stuttering is very different than any other part of my job, and people who stutter, it really depends on how it started. Is it a innate problem where they were born with it? Because stuttering can be um, genetic, so to speak. Or is it something they acquired because of a trauma? I had a little boy come to me who started stuttering. He was from another country, and the family was assaulted, and it terrorized him, and he started stuttering after that. So a lot of stuttering has to do with breathing and helping breathe out a word, basically, and the prosody is part of that.
Got it. So let's say an actor decides, okay, I want to do this kind of work, and I know you were saying that this is not something that you specialize in. How would someone go about finding a specialist who just works with people who are trying to, do dialect work?
So you would want to look for a speech language pathologist. Speech therapist is another. A lot of people think that it's a different career, but it's actually one and the same. You can look up speech therapist or speech language pathologist. It's the same thing. We all have the same training. Who specializes in accent reduction. So what you would do is just do a Google search, accent reduction speech therapist, and that's all they do.
Okay, so let's say there are, a bunch of people who pop up during the search, and if you were to be searching for someone, you walk into, I assume you set up an appointment first, or do you just call and ask questions first, or do you actually go in there? I guess what I'm trying to get at is what kind of questions would you ask to make sure that this is really the right person for you? Because I'm sure, like, there are a lot of people who say, I do this kind of work, but how do you really know if they're the ones who are going to be able to help you?
That's a great question. The thing is, as our training takes place, we're all trained the same way, but I have a friend of mine who works in the brain trauma unit at the hospital, and she specializes in swallowing, just swallowing, post-stroke. And if I went in there, I don't specialize in that. I have some understanding, but I wouldn't feel comfortable helping somebody learn how to swallow because it's life-threatening. So same thing goes for accent reduction. The first question that you would want to ask them is, how long have you been working in this specialized field? And you would just hope that they would be honest with you, maybe call some of their references. Just like going to a doctor that would specialize in something, they have to be certified in their specialty, and we do not. So I would probably want to call references or ask people, do you know anybody? A lot of actors, I would imagine, are in the same group of friends, so maybe they can get a referral. But it's something that I guess your gut instinct is maybe the best way to go, but we don't need a special certification for it.
God, it's so funny because, here you made some incredible suggestions. Just for me personally, my mind runs to the worst case scenario. So I come to you, let's say this is something you specialize in. So Karen, I just wanted to find out, so how long have you been doing this work? And then all of a sudden you respond, hey, look, I've been doing this thing a long time. Do you want to work with me or not? I mean, that's where my head goes. Somebody being insulted, by asking that kind of question. But you're saying that's a very legitimate kind of question, and nobody should be getting upset with it. Now, but as far as references go, isn't there something with, not divulging information about patients and things like that? How would you?
So what we would do? The thing about accent reduction is that would not be covered under insurance. So if I was a private therapist, I would have cash pay patients or clients. And if I was trying to market myself in that field, then I would ask some of my good, not good, but the clients that would come to me and say, I've known them for a long time, hey, could I share your information if anybody wanted to talk to you about your success?
Got it. Okay. So actually, those are great suggestions. I mean, something else that just popped up in my head, and I can run this by you as well. Maybe if people contact a local theater, because sometimes for certain productions, they will bring in a specialist to work with the actors to work on specific dialects for that play. And maybe they could, give you the names of some of the therapists in the area.
Yep. Not everybody uses a therapist either. There are a lot of people that will just go to somebody who specializes in this, maybe an actor who says, oh, I'm really good at this and I can help you. Maybe they can, maybe they can't, I don't know. But you don't need to have my personal degree to market yourself as an accent reduction professional.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, that's helpful to know. And so I know you had mentioned that New York accents or dialects are difficult. I'm assuming New Jersey could also be.
Boston.
Boston is a difficult one. Or would you say that those are probably the harder ones, at least in the U.S., to
Yes,
master?
yes.
And it seems like, um, and I know I'm going outside the country, but it seems like when I was doing some workshops in Johannesburg in South Africa, that seemed like a tough one to be able
Hmm.
to pick up. I mean, we were all speaking English, but sometimes it was actually a little difficult, at least for certain words to, for me to even just understand. And I can imagine trying to really, get that dialect down would be really tough. Even Australia seemed hard,
Yes,
and
yes.
and people living in Scotland, that seems like a tough one as
A,
well.
a lot of a lot of them that you've mentioned have to do with the shape of the vowels, how they change shape within your mouth as they speak them, which is different than the way we do. And I can't really give you an example of that, but vowel shape and how they say them really changes the way it sounds. Like Australia was one that came to mind. So
Got it.
it's a little it's just interesting though. I find it fascinating.
Well, what would be really neat, because see, you're looking at it from a very different perspective. You actually break it down to,
Mhm.
vowels, the way, the shape of the mouth, the way your tongue moves. I mean, all those kinds of things. And, we're just trying to get this, the sound out. Um, Now, it's interesting. Let's say if somebody was doing musical theater
Mhm.
and they are really more concerned about just being able to sing songs. And let's say they don't even, maybe they're in the chorus, they don't have any lines, but all their singing has to be done with a certain dialect. Do you find that that process can be any easier if it's just singing as opposed to spoken, or is it pretty much the same?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I don't really know how to answer that. I guess I would have to hear it because a lot of times you'll hear somebody, for example, with a really, a southern draw, a southern dialect, and then they sing and they don't have that. So to add it to a song, I don't really, I would have to hear all of the variables in order to answer that properly, I think.
Yeah, because I know that sometimes, I mean, maybe I'm showing my age a little bit. I used to listen to the Beatles all the time, and
Mhm.
sometimes when they were singing, I didn't really hear a really heavy Liverpool accent. There were certain words that always came out, but there were a lot of times it didn't. But when I would hear them interviewed,
Mhm.
then it was really obvious. So
Yes.
it does seem like, there was some kind of difference there. But I was just thinking, and once again, I know you don't specialize in this, but um, is it possible for someone to work with someone remotely and just do things, whether it's, via Skype or however they want to do it? Or is it more beneficial to actually be in front of the person live and actually see the person and work with them that way?
I would say if you could do it live, obviously that's always best, but your evaluation probably should be if you could do it one-on-one, um, that would be best because again, I feel bad. I keep saying this. There are so many variables. I have people that can't
Right.
make the L sound, and then when you do an evaluation, it includes what's called an oral peripheral exam. And sometimes I'll notice that somebody would have what's considered a short frenulum. It's a little technical, but I'm
What
gonna,
does that mean?
it's the little string on the bottom of your tongue
Uh-huh.
right there. And if it's short, you can't get your tongue tip to the top of it has to be clipped from a surgeon. So if somebody's having a problem with their L's, which is actually, a common problem, then I would need to know what I'm looking at. Other than the evaluation part, you can do it over Skype, and that's been very much a growing field right now in the speech world.
hmm Now, I know that there are, lots of CDs out there where people talk about, learn a language,
Mhm.
learn dialects. Have you have you had any kind of experience with those to know whether those are really helpful, or is it typically better to see someone to work with?
I would have to go with see someone. I mean, if you want to try that, I haven't found any that are spectacular. I mean, if you're learning a language in and of itself, say you want to learn how to speak Spanish, that's an entirely different subject. But if you're just trying to change your dialect or something like that, um, if you have a knack for it and you have an ear, I mean, people that, like I said, have that musical inclination and they have an ear for change and they can pick it up and change it, oh, it's a good way to try. I can't say that I've ever heard any that are spectacular.
Hmm. Okay. So just to kind of move away now from dialects, let's just talk about acting and voice for a bit. What, and I know this is kind of a loaded question because there's so many things we could probably spend 10 hours talking about this, but are there some, maybe even just some basic things that you would recommend an actor to do in order to keep their voice healthy, to keep it in shape? What kind of things would you suggest?
There are absolutely a lot of things, and I would say not just actors, but teachers and coaches. Those three fields have a lot of voice challenges or vocal challenges. So the things that you'll want to do, the main thing is stay hydrated. Hydration is a huge factor in vocal health. So water and I'd say water with lemon are your best two options. Anything that has caffeine is not your friend. And you want to, if you, let's say you're having, your voice is hoarse, for example, you would want to do vocal rest, which is try not to talk. I mean, text people, I don't really know what other things that you could say, write things down, but try to rest your voice. And you want to hydrate a lot, and you want to limit your salt and caffeine intake because salt dehydrates, obviously. So there are things that you should be doing. Now, what
Hmm.
people don't realize is you have two, they're referred to as vocal cords a lot, but they're actually called vocal folds. And when your vocal folds are together and they come apart and together when you speak and it lets air in and out, what happens is, let's say you have a coach, a football coach, and they scream a lot and they get what's called a vocal nodule. So, it'll create a little bump on the side of the vocal fold, much like you would get a blister on your foot from overuse. And the thing is, if you have a blister on your foot, it hurts and you feel it, and then you baby it a little bit, or you don't walk on it, or what have you. But you don't have any pain receptors on your vocal folds, so you don't know that it's there. It doesn't hurt. So you just keep overusing it. And you can tell when somebody's voice is hoarse, and then what they'll do is they'll push the air out and use more force, and then they'll make it worse. A lot of times singers will have that problem, and you'll hear them, they had to cancel their concert for vocal rest. And sometimes if it gets so bad and it can't be healed on its own, they have to have surgery to remove the vocal nodule.
Wow.
Yep.
S- s- I'm sorry, were you going to say something else? I didn't mean to cut you off. Oh, okay.
No.
So I'm curious. The very first thing you said was a lot of water and lemon. What is it? I'm curious. What is it about lemon that is good for somebody's voice?
Oh, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I guess it's the
I
citric
mean, I've heard
acid.
that
I'm not
too.
really sure if it's the vitamin. Yeah, I don't know that I'm the like I'm not a nutritionist. I just know what we were
Sure.
taught. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there, I mean, I've always heard, um, oh, I'm trying to remember how many, is it like 48 ounces of water a day or so? And I don't, maybe I shouldn't throw out a number that I'm not sure of, but I thought I remember speaking with someone who was
I
saying
would
it's,
I would say that's probably about right. I think it depends on it has more to do with the ratio of the size of your body. I think there's a ratio of how much you weigh to how much water that you should have. I don't know how to answer the amount of water, but water is the most important thing. Maybe chamomile teas, things like that. Alcohol is actually one thing you should avoid. A lot of people, um, maybe they'll have a drink at the end of the day, but if you're trying to have vocal health, alcohol isn't something that you should have on a daily basis, and smoking is terrible. I'm sorry to all the smokers out there, but that's not helping your voice at all.
And you were saying too that caffeine, like drinking coffee, is also something
Yeah.
that's not throat friendly.
No, it's dehydrating. Anything that dehydrates your skin will dehydrate your vocal folds as well.
Got it. So for you were talking about like the screaming and the football coach. So what do you do when you are, whether you're in a play and you're doing this night after night, maybe 8 days a week, or even if you're doing a film and there are scenes where you are screaming, you know you're going to do it, you have to do it, you also have a lot of dialogue after that. Is there any way to either prepare your voice to handle that, or things to do right afterwards to calm things down just so that you can get through it without doing serious damage?
Sure. So there are two questions that you gave me there. First is to prepare for it, and the other is for the after your work part. And I'll say after the work part, I'll go down that road first. And basically, it's doing all the things that I just mentioned. After your role, try not to talk, vocal rest, hydration, um, and this will go along with the preparing. You as a professional need to understand if you have a role or a job that requires screaming or projecting your voice like in a play, then you need to be trained on what's called diaphragmatic breathing, so you can project your voice. If you are in a play and you're projecting your voice from your throat, a lot of times you'll see people like screaming and, I told you, and you can see all the tension and muscles in my neck. And what happens is they're using all the wrong muscles. But if you learn to yell, project your voice or whatever from your diaphragm, then you're not using those muscles. And it's an entirely different way to speak and project your voice. And it's again, something that you would have to learn from a speech therapist.
Wow, so you can
Hmm.
that's like revolutionary information. So you can actually learn how to scream from your diaphragm instead of your
Yes,
throat.
correct.
And when you do it that way, you're not putting the stress on your throat.
Correct. Yes.
That is wild. I never heard of that. I mean,
It,
it seems like that's something that everybody needs to learn. Wow, that's incredible. All
yes.
right. And now, is that something that you could do with somebody in one session and just kind of teach them how to go about doing that? Or is that also a fairly,
It's not as long as accent reduction. I'd say maybe a few sessions, maybe two, three, depending on how fast somebody can pick it up. Some people have a hard time understanding, how to breathe from the diaphragm, but a lot of singers have to learn how to do that. When you sing, you have to sing from your diaphragm, or else you'll wreck your vocal cords. So you could go to a singing coach for that.
so it almost seems like then, as far as like a general kind of exercise, I'm assuming you would always recommend people to breathe through their diaphragm as well,
Correct.
and their diaphragm goes out when they breathe
Yes.
in, and then when you
Yep.
exhale, it goes in.
Hmm.
Got it. So here's a crazy question, and it's something we've always heard when we're younger, and maybe you can clarify this for us. So the weather's starting to change. It's getting a little bit, well, it will be getting a little bit colder pretty soon. To help keep your voice, nice and safe, wearing scarves around your neck, is that, I mean, because before you even start to answer that, I mean, here, we were always taught, if you go outside when it's cold, and and your hair gets wet, you're more susceptible to getting a cold. Well, it sounds like that's really a myth. So I'm just kind of curious if you are wearing scarf around your neck or turtlenecks and things like that, does that have any effect at all on your speech, on your throat, and keeping it safe? And
No, not that I'm aware of. No, I mean, the only thing that I could even come to mind would be if your neck is warmer, you're not tensing your shoulders and your throat. And when you tense these muscles up and you talk at the same time, that could have a slight impact, but generally speaking, I would say no, it doesn't really matter. But it looks good.
and it does feel,
Accessorize, and it feels good, yeah.
yeah. So when you were talking about projecting, so for somebody who maybe has a softer kind of sound in their voice, for film and TV, that's great because you're not hitting the back row. But if you are doing theater and you just naturally, or maybe it's not natural, but it's just the way that you do speak, it's more airy, it's softer, as a way of projecting more. Is that also part of that abdominal work, or are there other things that can be done to really help project a voice?
Okay. Well, the first thing is you're giving me a few different examples of voices. So when you look at vocal situations, you need to understand a few things. Do they have a soft voice because they're shy? Do they have a soft voice? I immediately think of, like, if you say airy, I think of Marilyn Monroe, that kind of voice. If you're referring to an airy voice and they're trying to project that, people don't have airy voices, generally speaking, unless A, they're trying to speak like in that whole cute, sexy kind of way. That's actually bad for your voice to do that on purpose. But if somebody has an airy voice and they can't help it, that's actually a concern, and they should go see a doctor about that, an ENT, because it's not typical to have an airy voice. It means that probably one of your vocal folds is paralyzed and you don't know it.
Wow. So like for instance, and I don't know if this is really the airy thing that you were talking about, but if somebody's kind of talking like this, would this be considered more airy? Is that kind of an airy sound to you? Is that what you mean by?
Yeah, so the voice, oh, it's very complicated, but that to me didn't sound airy.
Oh, okay.
That sounded like you were trying to change the tone of your voice a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so airy sounds like Marilyn Monroe, where she's very breathy.
Okay,
And I would
got it.
try to imitate that, but I don't want to embarrass myself.
Okay,
I,
you don't have to, and you have to wear a dress and stand over,
yeah.
on the street. Okay. Um, so basically, then so then we got rid of the airy part. How about
Yeah.
someone who's just more soft spoken, and we've ruled out the shyness. That's
Okay.
just the way that they speak, but they're
Okay.
on stage and they do have to hit a back row.
Yeah, that would be diaphragmatic breathing for sure.
And so there are very specific steps that someone could take that can completely change that for them. And it's a matter of learning how to breathe differently.
Correct.
Wow. Now, now for someone who maybe is trying to get work doing let's say animation, voiceovers for animation, and all of a sudden they have to change their normal sounding voice and maybe raise it up, make it squeakier, making it sound maybe more childlike, taking it to a different
Mhm.
octave, some places they're not normally going to, as an actor. Is that? It seems like that would be more than just abdominal work. I have no idea how someone could possibly go into, making those kinds of adjustments.
Um, I would say that people that do voiceover work, and especially cartoon-like, they have to have that knack that we were talking about earlier, where they can pick up how to change things just by listening to it and have the ability to it's basically it's stretching your vocal folds in unique ways that they don't even realize that they're doing. So if I wanted to speak in a lower tone right now, I would say, "Hi," and I know what's going on because I had to study it, but you're actually creating a situation in your vocal folds where they're thickening. And then if you go to a higher pitch, then they're stretching out in a different way. So it's a little bit of there's a lot of variables in terms of voiceovers. I don't really know how they do that. I think it's really interesting how people can change their voice and imitate like that. But I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, no, you did. But are there certain exercises that people can do that will safely stretch their vocal folds so
Okay, okay,
that,
yes. So you would want to do like a range, like singers do, where they go up and down the scale, the musical scale, and just, do like an ah, a vowel sound like the AH, and go up and down the musical scale back and forth and practice that, and that will help sort of exercise the vocal cords.
and then how does that work? It's kind of, when I'm thinking of stretching, other parts of your body, you kind of go down to a certain point where you feel, okay, this is about as far as I can go, and maybe you go just a teensy bit further, and then you back up, and then the next day you come in and you try to hit that new point, and then maybe is it a similar kind of thing where you slowly start to try to do those stretches?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, so it sounds like then for a lot of this kind of work, I mean, the best thing to do is to find a professional to work with, because it also seems like you could do some pretty serious damage if you
Yes.
are, not self-medicating, but you're, self-analyzing how to go about doing these things. And this is not something you want to play with if you're trying to use your voice as a career. Or, or just to have a voice. It's not a good idea to, do these things on your own just because you could do a lot of serious damage.
And I would say that's especially true in theater work. Projecting your voice every night, several times a night, what have you, you could do damage easily, yes.
And I'm just kind of curious, just with not specific vocal exercises, but just exercising in general, whether it's, running or jogging or spinning, riding bikes, whatever it is, do those things have any kind of effect, either positively or negatively, on voice work, or are those completely different things?
Well, the body's connected in so many ways. I would say, for example, yoga is probably the best choice because of all the breathing involved. They teach diaphragmatic breathing in yoga, so that's an excellent choice for exercising just for the practice, and it's relaxing. So when we talk about the voice, what we want to do is avoid straining the muscles here and here, the throat and the shoulders. So if you see those people that like do heavy weightlifting, that could create tension in that area. And if you create tension, then you could, in fact, I mean, all the muscles are kind of connected, and I don't know if you would damage it, but you're not helping it. So I would say yoga is a better choice. And if you do things like heavy weightlifting and things that are strenuous in that area, you should see, massage therapist or something to loosen up the tight muscles.
And by jogging or doing anything that has you breathing harder, does that have any kind of impact at all on?
I would say the only time that may happen is if you're in the middle of a role and you have a little vocal strain already, and maybe you're running outside on a very cold day, that could impact it a little bit more, that it's not helping the situation. I don't know if it's actually hurting it, but you're not gonna help the situation as you would be if you were doing yoga in a room, so to
Okay.
speak. Hmm.
So basically, the windup is there are lots of things that we can be doing and that we should be doing as actors to not only take care of our voices, to help, prepare, but just make sure that before you start doing any kind of work on yourself, to make sure that you're working with a professional so you don't do serious damage to yourself.
Yes.
Hey, and so for people who might want to get in touch with you to get more training for, you know, whatever it is that they're looking for, what is the best way to reach you?
My email address, I guess, is the best. I don't know if you want me to share that in
Sure.
this. Sure.
Sure.
Okay, so my name is Karen Books, Books as in reading. I married that name. So it's Karen, Karen, Books, Books, 10 @gmail.com.
Great. Hey, Karen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all this information and your years of expertise with us. It was invaluable information, and really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, everybody, that was incredible. Love talking with Karen. Besides being a great speech therapist, she's also just like a really nice person, too. So if you do have any questions for you, you do know how to reach her. If you are interested in doing private mentoring with me, you can always catch me at howtoactandmodel.org/coaching. You can get that from my website, howtoactandmodel.org. And if you're interested in being a season pass member, there is a link right on the upper right-hand corner of the homepage, and you can read about that there as well. Can't wait to get back in touch with you next month with another really interesting workshop. And hope you have a great next 30 days. I'm Aaron Marcus, and can't wait to talk with you again soon.